well, let me pull up some numbers, right? I just don't want to go on the 3 stores that I went into because maybe I could be wrong, right? It could have it could have just been a coincidence that I went into 3 different stores in one day, and all of the leadership were people of not people of color. Right? Just could have been a coincidence, but as the facts would have it, I pulled up this information, and so I'm going to go through that and kind of talk about that today.
People's Voice.
Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the People's Voice. Thank you very much for checking out the podcast again this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, we appreciate you taking some time out to listen to the podcast today. We do understand that you can be utilizing your time to do something else. So it is truly appreciative that you're spending a few moments with us, or at least the next 20 to 30 minutes with us to hear what we have to say, or hear what I have to say regarding today's topic. But as always, if the information that's provided you feel is valuable, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. That way you'll be notified when episodes drop. We put out a new episode every Friday, and then we also put the video out on YouTube every Friday at 3 p.m. But please subscribe, share the information, and as always, the support is greatly appreciated. Today, I want to get into the grocery industry, the food industry, the food and grocery industry. It's really more on the grocery side. I don't want to kind of commingle the two. I really wanted to talk about the grocery industry today, and specifically talk about diversity within the grocery industry. And, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this today is because, I know in the world that we live in today, people don't really even go into the supermarkets anymore. It's like, I know so many people, well, I should say I shouldn't generalize, but I guess within my social network, so many people now either have their groceries delivered, or they pull up to a store and just have someone load their groceries into their car and then they take off. Which, to me, I guess I'm funny that way, if you want to call it funny, but I just, there's something about people with the food and touching the food. I got to be able to touch it myself and pick it out myself, especially when you start dealing with vegetables and fruits. My mind is just, I guess a little warped that way. But anyway, I personally still go into the supermarkets, right? That's my thing, right? I got to go in, I shop, get what I need, come on out. Anyway, as a result of that, walking through the grocery stores, I noticed that, there's a very common scenario, at least in the grocery stores that I've frequented, and that is from again what I'm seeing visually. Right, this is what started this topic: the lack of diversity in the management of those stores, and it caught my attention because literally. I was, having one of those days where, you go to one store and you pick up some things, but they didn't have exactly what you needed. So then I went to another store to kind of get, the additional items. And then I'm like, oh, well, I forgot the one more thing and I'm close to this store here. So let me just shoot over here. So literally I went to like 3 stores in like one day. I know it's insane, but in going to these stores, each of these stores, I noticed that the management or those in leadership of the store were not people of color. But yet, many of the people that were on the front lines in terms of the workers were people of color, but the management were not people of color. And these stores were in predominantly black neighborhoods. So that was like a dog whistle, or not even a dog whistle. It was like a bell, like ding, like there's a diversity issue here. So today I want to talk about diversity in the grocery industry, specifically at the management and C levels, because there's been a ton of initiatives that have been in place, especially during the few years, a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, when there was so many different stories regarding, racial injustice. You had Black Matters movement and things of that nature that really took off a few years ago. And as a result of that, many companies across the spectrum began to re-examine their DEI initiatives. And DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives or programs, where they made commitments that they would, do more to increase diversity within their companies and the greater share of equity and inclusion of all people and all of these wonderful things that they said. And to the credit, many of these companies have either attempted or have made some strides in being more diverse in terms of their workforce, and also in terms of bringing on suppliers who are from marginalized communities and marginalized groups of the country. But there is still a huge issue in diversity of management and also diversity of leadership within the grocery industry. And so that's what I want to talk about today. Diversity in the grocery industry, specifically in management and leadership. So of course, for me to do this, I said, well, let me pull up some numbers, right? I just don't want to go on the 3 stores that I went into, because maybe I could be wrong, right? It could have just been a coincidence that I went into 3 different stores in one day, and all of the leadership were not people of color. Right? Just could have been a coincidence. But as the facts would have it, I pulled up this information, and so I'm going to go through that and kind of talk about that today. So the first thing I did, I pulled up a survey here that was done by Zippia, or I should say it's on Zippia.com. And they did a survey, and I'm reading directly from their site. It says, using a database of almost 30 profiles, they looked at estimates in terms of demographics for grocery store managers in the United States. And they also verified these stats, based on census and also, job opening data for accuracy. And based on the survey and the research and analysis that they did, they came up with these stats. So talking about diversity in management in the grocery industry, or the lack of it. So they surveyed this, and they said there's about 8,000 managers, or at least those who are identified as store managers in the United States in grocery stores, right? Now there's a huge, discrepancy when you start talking about men and women. First of all, 75% of men or I should say 75% of managers in grocery stores are men, or at least have been identified through this study. And then 24% were women, which I also note kind of picked up as well during this visit to the store that the three stores that I went into happened to all be white men as well, as far as management. Oh, I know somebody might say, well, how did you know there was managers? Well, you know how in the store, first of all, there's very distinctive gear that each of them wear. I think like the managers wear the non-colored gray whatever shirts that are distinctively different than the employee shirts. But then, especially at the second store, when it caught my attention as I was walking out, they have pictures on the wall. And the picture is a store manager's white guy. So that's kind of how I knew. I know some people might say, well, you might just been assuming. Nope. I verified it. And then went back 2 days later to the first store just to walk in there to see if the picture was going to be on the wall. And sure enough, picture was on the wall, white guy. And I don't want to come off as making this purely, I'm not, what I'm trying to say is I understand the business, right? And so that's where the business is at now. This is not an attack on white men, white people. I'm just pointing out that there's a huge disparity. And I noticed it just in the three stores that I was in the area that I live in. But going back to the study from Zippia, so they surveyed or they identified over 8,000 grocery store managers in the United States. The majority of them are men compared to women. Average age of a store manager is around 44 years old. But this is where we start getting into the statistics about the disparities in terms of racial disparities. This is, again, from Zippia.com. And as you know, I'll post all of this information on the video when I posted the links so you can look at this yourself. 67% were identified as white in terms of store managers, 67%. 15% were identified as Hispanic or Latino. 6% or 6.4% were identified as Asian, and then 6.2% were identified as Black or American African. And I got that from Dr. Umar. I like that. He said American African. I'm not going to break it down like he break it down. Check out that. I don't know where I saw it. He has a new interview. I thought he did a great job. American African, 6.2%. But so here, based on the the stats here, clearly there's a issue in terms of diversity within the grocery industry. Okay, and again, this has been noted before. The grocery industry has been, for decades, been kind of highlighted as one of the industries that have been reluctant to change and reluctant to giving opportunities to, marginalized groups in terms of opportunities in leadership. Now, again, there's been huge strides made in terms of diversifying the frontline workers, right? And really a lot of this has to do with economics more than morals, but they've identified through surveys that people, of course, when they walk in the store, they want to feel like they identify with the people that they're buying from. And of course, the first people that you see when you walk into the store are your frontline workers, right? Those are your floor managers, your cashiers, your deli, your deli workers, things of that nature. So in that aspect, there's been a lot of change. But in terms of leadership at the store level, there's still a huge amount of lack of diversity, as pointed out from these numbers. Now, these numbers, again, have definitely have changed over the last decade or so. So let me also identify that. Over the last decade or so, the numbers have gotten better in terms of diversity in management at the store level. Hasn't been a tremendous amount of change now, but it's been some change. And let me go through those numbers. So in terms of breakdown from about a decade. So again, I'm reading this study here on Zippia.com, and they went back to 2010. So in 2010, based on the study that they conducted in the U.S., let me be clear about that, there was about 74% of grocery store managers identified as white. Okay, that was back in 2010. This particular study goes up to 2021. So as of 2021, it was 67%. Here's the thing, though, and this is where I become very selfish, and I'm talking about specifically American Africans. In 2010, 6% of store managers were identified as American Africans. That number then decreased from 2010 to 2015. That number decreased by almost a half a percentage point. And then you saw a spike in 2016, but then again from 2016, the number started to reduce back down to basically 6%. So there hasn't been much change in terms of African American leadership at the store level. But now where you have seen a huge increase in terms of diversity at the store level for management has been with Hispanics and Latinos, who in 2010 were at 11% in terms of management leadership at the store level. And now, as of this last survey, they're at 15%. So they've seen an increase. So I say all of this to say there's been some change in diversity, but it's been very subtle, very little, and it needs to be addressed because, again, I'm in just one community. I can only imagine how this is replicated across communities across the country, especially communities of color, where the leadership in the store doesn't reflect the leadership or the demographic within the communities that they serve. And this makes a big difference, right? This makes a huge difference in terms of the experience that you as a shopper may endure because of the leadership in the store. Now, improving diversity in management, and I'm reading an article here from Supermarket News, and they also pointed out, some of the challenges as well. And I'm reading directly from the article here. It says, despite the supermarkets industry's efforts to enhance their diversity of its workforce, as I said earlier, it still has a lot of room for improvement. And experts from Rutgers School of Management and labor relations said that based on some observations, the supermarket industry could benefit from having more diversity in management levels. And again, that benefit trickles down all the way down to, it could be subtle things like the music that you hear in the store. Okay. And, music in the store is part of a marketing tool as well. And there's a deep science to the music that you hear. And there's a reason that you hear it. But it trickles down to things of that nature. Leadership is important, especially for the grocery stores. And in my opinion, it should reflect the communities that it serves. Reading this article again here from Supermarket News, it says, instead of a glass ceiling, racial and ethnic minority experiences, instead of a glass ceiling, racial and ethnic minorities are experiencing a sticky floor. They get stuck at the first level within the organization with little opportunity to advance. And that's another crucial part, because a lot of times people of minorities and marginalized members of marginalized communities, they'll work in these grocery stores for decades in the same role with little to no elevation in their role. And a lot of this has to do with the lack of diversity within the industry and the lack of willingness to give opportunities to people of color in the industry. And now we're just talking about the grocery level. At the C level, there is Deloitte did a study about 2 years ago. And they also pointed this out at the C level in terms of the amount of diversity at the board level, also at the VP levels, the president levels, and based on their study, and I'm reading here from a study from Deloitte, and you can find this on Deloitte.com. They still have 58% of people of color are underrepresented in C level suites. And when I say C, I'm talking about the executive level, VP, or sit on boards. There's still a 58% underrepresentation level at that portion of the business, which again affects everything. It's a trickle down effect. When you don't have diversity in your leadership, that trickles down to management decisions within the region, within the city, and right down to the store based on the leadership at the top. So the grocery business has a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of increasing diversity and sticking to those DEI objectives that they all said that they would be following after 2020 and 2021, when you had a lot of the racial unrest here in the United States. So what can be done, right? We talked about the issues. What can be done? Well, I found a great article here from MBS. This is MBS Intelligence. They did a great article on kind of diversity and what can be done specifically in the grocery business. So first of all, you have to define what diversity is, and that's the first thing you have to do. What does the organization believe diversity is, and what should it look like? After that, you want to identify the kind of your strengths and your priorities to improve that, right? You want to look at what your current strengths are, and then what the priorities are for you to get to where you want to be in terms of hitting your DEI goals. It has to be led from the top, right? So those decisions have to be made from the top down. So the leadership at the top has to make a commitment and then has to see it through. You have to obviously set targets, and this with any goal, you need to set targets and have measurable progress that you can look back to and see if that you're actually connecting to that. The main thing here, and they listed about 10, but the most important thing that I think out of this list is number one, educate and support your line managers. So that means that the managers at the store have to identify people that can be elevated up into management levels, and they have to be able to also articulate that to upper management so those changes can be made, or individuals can be relocated to stores where they can become managers. And then the last thing here, I think, is it says keep diversity and inclusion high on your organization's agenda. As I stated many times, especially in the last couple of years, it's been a huge push. And then once the lights go out and the media goes away, everybody goes back to business as normal. So it has to stay at the front line. It has to be an agenda that stays consistent within the organization in order for change to occur. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. A lot of these topics now are just going to be based on my observations and things that I experienced. I like I said, I walked into these 3 stores and just was like a ding, 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 ding. Like, wow, why am I in these stores? And everybody that's, assisting me on the front line are people of color, but the management doesn't represent the people that are in the stores at the front line, and definitely doesn't represent the neighborhood for which they support. So, for those of you who work in the grocery industry, some work needs to be done, and let's get to it. But as always, I hope this information was enlightening and valuable. Again, if you feel that it is, please feel free to subscribe to the podcast. You can also leave a comment on all of our social media platforms. You can reach me at I am Trey Evans. That is at Instagram, Twitter, and also on Facebook. or you can reach us at the show podcast, which is the People's Voice Podcast. The People's Voice Podcast. So as always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute. The People's Voice.